My name is Stephen Willeford, and on November 5th, 2017, a madman came into my community and started shooting up the church. I was home relaxing and didn't understand what was going on. I could hear noise, but the part of the house where I was actually had more insulation than the rest of the house. My daughter was in the kitchen washing dishes, and she came into my room in a panic and said, "Dad, doesn't that sound like gunfire to you?" And I told her, I said, "Actually, it sounds like someone tapping at the window." And I went over and I opened the curtain to my bedroom and looked out, and I couldn't see anything, and there was no one there. She said, "Come into the kitchen." She said, and so I went into the kitchen with her, and it indeed sounded like gunfire. And the mind tries to make excuses of what it could be. It's hard for your head to put together that somebody's actually shooting. And I know very much what gunfire sounds like. And I told her it is gunfire, and I ran to the safe. And she ran out the door, jumped in her car, and ran up the block to find out what was going on. I ran to the safe, I opened the safe up, I pulled out my rifle, I pulled out an AR-15 and a magazine, and I grabbed a box of ammunition. And she came running back into the house and said, "Dad, there's a man in black tactical gear with a helmet and everything shooting up the church." And by this time, I was on the phone with my wife. She had gone down the road to work on my other daughter's home. She's building a home about 5 miles down the road. And I told my wife, I said, "Stay where you're at." And she said, "What's going on?" I said, "There's an active shooter at the church." And she said, "Don't go over there." And I hung up on her. And then I told my other daughter, "Did you call 911? And she said, "I did. They're aware of it." And at that point, I'm loading rounds into a magazine. And I ran out the door, and my daughter followed me. And as she came out the door behind me, I turned around and looked at her, and I told her, "Go back in the house and load me a magazine. I've only got a handful of ammunition, and I may need more." And I knew she couldn't. I spent 34 years in construction, and we call it busy work. When you want to get an apprentice out of your hair and he's looking for something to do, and you don't have anything constructive for him to do it, you give him busy work. You give him something to do to get him out of your hair and out of your sight for a while. I sent her down the road, or back into the house, to load a magazine that I knew she couldn't find, with ammunition that she didn't know where it was, to get her, because I didn't want her following me over there. I didn't want to give this man a target that I cared about more than what he already had. And I also didn't want I didn't want her to see me fail if I was to fail. Because then she would have run to my side, and he would have used her for his next target. And I ran across the street and I yelled. And at this point, I'm going to tell you, I'm a Christian. And there was no reason for me to yell. I don't have a battle cry. That would be silly. There's no reason that I would give away that I was coming and take my element of surprise. And so I'm going to say, looking back at it, there was no tactical reason to have yelled, but I yelled. And I'm going to say it was the Holy Spirit calling out the demon that was inside him, and I believe that. To the core of my being, I believe that. And what he had been doing in the church is he would shoot somebody, and when they would go down, he would walk over and he would finish them off. And he had just shot Chris Workman in the back, and he had just shot Chris's mother twice, and he was walking over to finish them off. And people in the church heard me yell, and he heard me yell. And he came out at that moment. And he came out of the church shooting at me. And as a instructor, a pistol instructor, I know very much what a gun going off pointing at you would be, what it meant. And yet I was terrified. But I remained dead calm, and again, that goes to what I believe the Holy Spirit was just whispering in my ear, don't worry about that. And he hit the truck in front of me, he hit the car behind me, and he hit the house behind me, and I hit him. He had Class 3 body armor on, which meant that my bullets wouldn't penetrate that armor. But if anyone knows anything about armor, it may save your life, but you feel it. You feel every one of those hits. And it can break ribs and stuff. And I hit him a couple of times in the body armor, and I'm certain of that. Because he stopped shooting at me at that moment and started for the door of his vehicle. His vehicle was sitting in the middle of the road with the driver's side door open, and the engine still running. And he ran around the front of the vehicle and ran to the door, and when he turned to the side, I saw the opening in between the plates of Class 3 body armor. Has body armor on the front and body armor on the back, and it velcros across the side. And I put a bullet there. And I put a bullet in his legs. And he got in his vehicle. He took 2 more shots at me through the side window and then drove off at a high rate of speed. I ran out into the street as he was driving away, and I put another bullet through the back of his windshield. And he ran down the road. I looked off to my left, and I saw a pickup truck that had pulled up to the stop sign. And he had witnessed the whole shooting. And I ran over and knocked on his window and said, that man just shot up the church, and we have to stop him. And I didn't even know Johnny's name at the time. I had never met Johnny before in my life. I didn't know his name, and he unlocked his door. And he let me in to his truck, and I don't know what made him think that I was the good guy, or maybe it was the fact that I was barefooted and the other guy had body armor on. I didn't take time to put my shoes on because I kept hearing those shots. And I knew every one of those shots was probably aimed at one of my neighbors and one of my friends. And so I didn't take time to put the shoes on. And so I guess that might have been what clued him that I was not the bad guy, because I was not prepared. And so we blasted down the road, and as I got in and we headed out, we couldn't even see the other vehicle anymore. He was so far down the road. And Johnny called 911, and they put him with dispatch. And he was talking to dispatch, and he was telling them we're headed down 539. And I had the presence of mind to drop my magazine and look in my magazine to see how many rounds I had left. I had 1 round left in my magazine, meaning I had 1 in the chamber, 1 in the magazine. I had 2 rounds left. I put the magazine back up in the rifle, and I told Johnny, tell them hurry, hurry. I have 2 rounds left. And the only thing I could think of is at the end of this chase was going to be another gunfight, and it had to be good. We chased him for about 11 miles. And as we started catching up with him, we looked, and I told him, that's it, that's the vehicle, because it was missing the back glass. And it was the very vehicle that I had chased off. And so we were catching him, and I looked over at Johnny, not even knowing his name, and I told him, I said, you know, if we catch that vehicle, you're going to have to put it off the road. And Johnny said, just real matter-of-factly, yeah, I already figured that. So Johnny was there, and I believe he was there because God put him in the right place too, because most people would have just drove off. And we were trying to describe to dispatch at that moment exactly where we were, telling them crossroads as we passed the crossroads, and trying to tell them, don't send the police to the church. We're chasing the shooter. Of course, they had to send police to the church. They didn't know whether there was a second shooter. They didn't know what was going on at all. And as we came up on him, closed ground, he pulled off to the right-hand side of the road, off the road, and stopped. And I still had my rifle in my right hand, and I reached over and opened the door with my left hand and started to push the door open. I was going to stand behind the door. And before I got a chance to put a foot down, he punched the car, hit a road sign in the middle of the car, and it folded over and went over the back of the car, right back up onto the road, and about half a mile down the road, halfway around a curve, and then over the top of the curve, through a fence, and about 50 yards out into a field. And Johnny and I pulled up, staying on the road, and stopped. And like I say, he was out in the middle of the field. And I got out again, and I told Johnny, I said, just get down below the dash. Because Johnny didn't have a gun or anything. I said, just stay below the dash. And of course, Johnny didn't listen to me. He got out and went around to the back of the truck. And I got out, and I put my rifle across the hood of the truck again. And there I was, using a truck again for cover. And then I started yelling at the car, get out, and probably used some language that I don't normally use. Wanted him to know that I was very serious, and didn't see any movement. And they estimated that I stayed there with the rifle across the hood of the truck for anywhere from 5 to 7 minutes. And that seemed like an eternity. And finally I heard a PA system come on, and it said, driver, get out of your vehicle with your hands up. And I turned and I looked up the road, and I could see a police officer had pulled up there, and he was standing behind his door with his pistol drawn and a PA mic in the other hand. And he said it again. He said, driver, get out of your vehicle with your hands up. Well, I thought, the police are here. I'm done, and I don't want any mistakes. So I laid the rifle on top of the hood of the truck, and I started back to the back of the truck with my hands up. And the officer looked at me and came back on the PA system. He said, not you, which indicated that, and he showed me more respect at that moment than I expected. I fully well expected to go to jail, and we could figure it out later. But the tactical advantage that I had, I was 50 yards from the guy, and I had a rifle, and the officer was 100 yards from the guy, and he just had a pistol. So he indicated he knew who I was, and I went over there and picked the rifle back up, and I held him until I saw 5 or 6 more squad cars come up, and they each pulled out their AR-15s and stuff, and then I knew, okay, I am done. I am not needed anymore. And I pulled my rifle and I put it on the back of the toolbox of the truck. And I waited by the back tires of the truck, and I must have waited there for 45 minutes. And I thought, what are they waiting for? I had no clue why they would take so long. And finally, I decided that I was going to make a run back to the police line. You know, that day was 90 degrees, and I was barefoot on pavement, and my feet were getting hot. So I started to go back there, and they said, no, stay where you're at. We'll bring a cruiser up. And they brought a police car up and said, just squat down beside the car and come back. And they brought me back to the line beside the car, using the car for cover. And then I figured out why they weren't advancing on the vehicle. They brought out a drone. They were waiting on a drone. And it all made sense to me. Why would you risk an officer's life when you could wait for a drone? And they flew the drone over, and they looked in, and inside the vehicle, and determined that he had taken his own life, that he had turned the gun on himself. And I found out later that he had called his wife, told her that he had done a very bad thing, and asked for her for forgiveness, and told her that he was shot multiple times and wasn't going to make it. And they said he had turned the gun on himself and shot himself. And I guess that was the last gift, because I think he was going to die anyway. He might have, might not have. But now I don't have to tell people that I killed a man. I didn't do it. He did it himself. He took his own life. The police told me that he had 5 more guns in the vehicle with multiple loaded magazines. He had gone in and out of the church 3 separate times to reload before I got there. He dropped 15 30-round magazines in the church. He put over 450 rounds out of one rifle through the church, and plus multiple rounds through a pistol. He was nothing but pure evil. I don't believe a human can be as evil as he was without being inhabited by a demon. I truly believe that. But he had to have allowed that demon to inhabit him also. The Second Amendment was made for this very purpose. I believe there's more good people out there in this world than there are bad people. And I believe we have an obligation to take care of our families and our neighbors, our friends, and people around us. And I exercise my Second Amendment. And I believe that training is very important. I don't mean that you have to be the best of the best, but I believe that if you are planning on using your gun to defend other people, you should know how it shoots. And because every round you fire, every bullet that you pull the trigger on has your name on it. And I believe that you have an obligation to know where that bullet's going. I think the worst thing in the world that I don't think I could have lived with myself if I would have known that I would have missed him and it went and hit someone innocent. So I think there's a lot of obligation, and I'm not saying that everybody should be as good with a gun as I am. I enjoy the sport. I'm very good with my gun. But if you're not going to take that obligation, then maybe you should defend those closely around you and not consider running into gunfire. I think you need to at least know what you're doing, somewhat. I've been teaching defensive classes for years. And one lady asked me one time in one of my classes, don't I need a high-capacity magazine? And I asked her, why? Are you planning on missing a lot? It would have been good to have more than 8 rounds for sure. You know, I would have been a lot more comfortable. And I do believe in the right to have a high-capacity magazine, and this shows how the possibility would have been that I would have needed more. I felt very underarmed when I found out I only had 2 rounds left. And I should have had a magazine loaded that day, but I didn't. So again, the Second Amendment, and I believe that the militia they always talk about with the Second Amendment is the armed citizen, because that's what it was back when the Constitution was written and the Bill of Rights was written, is the militia was the people. And if you read the rest of the Second Amendment, it says, yeah, well-regulated militia, and then it says, the very next line, the right of the people shall not be infringed. And our Constitution and our Bill of Rights wasn't written to tell the government what they could do. Instead, the Bill of Rights was written to tell the government what they couldn't do. And I want to make something real plain and clear also, is on November 5th, when I ran across the street and he came out and I engaged him in gunfire, I did not shoot him because I hated him. I shot him because I loved everybody that was in that church. And we lost a lot of good people in that church that day.